A gunshot shattered the silence, and I spun around. My cheating wife lay on the ground, clutching a crimson stain on her dress. My blood ran cold. "Sir, it's a trap." My bodyguard grabbed my shoulder. "Your wife's lover hired a hitman to take you out. We need to leave, now." I looked at Catherine, who was reaching out to me, whispering something inaudible, and fury boiled inside me. "No, I'm not leaving until I finish this myself," I growled, clenching my fists. And here's what happened next. 3 weeks earlier. The first time I suspected something was off, it was a small thing, too small to be called evidence, but big enough to itch at the back of my mind. Catherine had always been a liar, but lately, she was getting lazy with it. "Business dinner," she had said that night, slipping into a black dress I had never seen before. I had asked her when she bought it. She laughed, twirling her hair. "Oh, babe, I've had this forever," she said. "You just never notice." I noticed. And I noticed the red lipstick she never wore for me. The perfume I didn't recognize. The way she grabbed her phone before I could get a glance at the screen. I stayed up that night, waiting for her to come home. 2 a.m. She strolled in like she owned the place, her heels clicking on the marble floor, humming to herself. When she saw me sitting in the dark, she barely blinked. "God, don't tell me you're turning into one of those insecure husbands." She tossed her purse on the couch. "I told you, it was business." Business. Right. The kind of business that left a faint cologne on her dress that wasn't mine. But I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. 2 days later, she left her phone on the counter while she was in the shower. My heart was a hammer in my chest as I picked it up, my hands shaking. Catherine had a passcode, of course, she wasn't stupid, but she was predictable. I tried our anniversary. Denied. Her birthday. Denied. Then, on a whim, I typed his birthday. The one name I had always been suspicious of, Jason. Her coworker. The guy who laughed a little too hard at her jokes. Unlocked. And what I saw made my stomach turn to lead. Text after text. Filthy. Shameless. "Last night was amazing. I can still feel you on me. I told you, he has no clue. He actually believes the business dinner's excuse, huh? Miss you already. Let's do round 2 tomorrow at the hotel." My hands clenched so tight around the phone I thought it would snap. I knew my wife was a liar. A manipulator. But I never thought she was this much of a heartless, scheming piece of trash. She stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, steam curling around her. When she saw me holding her phone, her expression flickered, just for a second, before she forced a smile. "Babe? What are you doing?" I turned the screen toward her. Let her see the filth she had been writing. She didn't even flinch. Didn't gasp. Didn't stutter. Catherine smirked. Smirked. "Oh, come on, Logan," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's just texts. You're really gonna throw a fit over a couple of messages?" I stared at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You think I'm that stupid?" She tilted her head, lips curving into a slow, lazy grin. "I think you're exactly that stupid." I didn't know what scared me more, the betrayal or the fact that she felt so comfortable throwing it in my face. "I work my ass off for this family," I said, my voice low, dangerous. "I give you everything. And this is how you repay me?" Catherine sighed, like I was annoying her. "Oh my God, Logan, stop being so dramatic. It's not that deep." "What, you thought we were some fairy tale couple? That I was just gonna stay loyal forever?" She let out a cruel laugh. "Grow up." I took a step forward. She took a step back. That's when I saw it, the tiniest flicker of fear in her eyes. She didn't think I'd fight back. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd sit there and take it. She was dead wrong. I threw her phone against the wall, watching it explode into pieces. Catherine gasped, but I didn't care. "I'm done playing your little games," I said, voice shaking with rage. "You wanna lie? Cheat? Make a fool out of me? Fine. But don't think for a second I'm going to let you walk all over me." She laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "Oh, please. What are you gonna do? Divorce me?" I smiled. "No." Her smirk wavered. "I'm going to make you regret ever meeting me." And I meant it. I could feel the weight of her words in the air between us, the tension tightening like a noose. Catherine's laughter faded, her cocky smirk slipping as she took a slow step back, her eyes darting toward the door. She was trying to calculate how fast she could get out of the situation she'd just caused. I didn't give her the satisfaction of responding. I didn't need to. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder at the shattered phone on the floor, the pieces still sizzling with the tension of the moment. And then her gaze landed back on me, hollow, calculating, desperate. I saw a flicker of something else there. Fear. Not for me, but for herself. "Logan," her voice was softer now, quieter, like she was trying to control the storm she'd created. "You're overreacting. This is just something we can fix. I know I've been distant, but—" "Fix it?" I repeated the words like they were a foreign language. "You think this can be fixed? After everything? You betrayed me, Catherine. You let someone else get between us. And you lied. Over and over." She took another step backward, now eyeing the exit. Her fingers twisted nervously at her towel, but the facade was already starting to crack. The wickedness in her had been exposed, her smugness evaporating like smoke. "You don't understand," she started again, her voice shaking. "I was bored. You've been so busy with work, you weren't there for me. Jason was just easier to talk to." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Bored? Easier to talk to? What did I ever do to deserve this? Is that what you think? That you're entitled to do whatever you want just because I'm working? I'm doing this for us. For you. I gave up everything, Catherine. And you didn't even care. I had been blind. She'd been lying to me, sneaking around for months, maybe even longer. And I'd been the fool. The whole time, I had been trying to provide the best for us, believing that everything would just work out. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I didn't give her the chance. "No, I'm done. You don't get to talk your way out of this." There was a knock at the door. My bodyguard, Rick, entered without waiting for a response. He looked at Catherine, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, we've got a situation." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "What kind of situation?" Rick's gaze flickered briefly to Catherine, then back to me. "A dangerous one. It's not safe here anymore. We need to move, now." I couldn't breathe. I turned back to Catherine. "What did you get me into?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with something that seemed like panic. But it was too late for that. She had made her choices. I didn't do anything. I didn't. I walked past her, my focus entirely on Rick. "What do you mean, not safe? Talk to me." Rick's eyes were hard. "Your wife's lover, Jason, he hired someone. He hired a hitman to take you out." A chill ran through me. I could feel the floor beneath me go cold, like the world had shifted in an instant. "A hitman?" I whispered, my voice hollow. Rick nodded. "We need to get you out of here. Now." I didn't look back at Catherine. I didn't care about her panic or her excuses. I didn't even want to hear it. All I could focus on was getting out of that house, getting away from everything she had destroyed. But then something unexpected happened. Catherine rushed forward, her hands reaching out as if trying to grab onto me. "Logan, don't leave me. I was just making a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen." Her voice was high, frantic. I stopped, dead in my tracks. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, a rush of anger and disgust burning through my veins. "No, you didn't just make a mistake, Catherine," I said, voice barely controlled. "You chose this. You chose him. And now, because of your choices, I'm going to die, or worse, because you couldn't keep your legs closed." She gasped, and for a moment, I thought I saw her guilt, genuine guilt, pass over her face. But it was quickly replaced by that same defiance. She stood straighter, like a queen about to meet her downfall, but she still expected to control the narrative. "You're making a mistake, Logan. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry. Just give me a chance. I swear I'll make it up to you." I felt the rage surge again. "A chance? You've had all the chances, Catherine. You had every damn opportunity to be honest with me, to fix this before it went too far. But now, I'm supposed to give you another shot. Do you hear yourself? I'm done." She froze, her words hanging in the air between us like a hollow promise, a desperate plea. "You can't just leave me," she whispered. But I could. I turned, walking away from her, from everything. As I followed Rick out the door, the cool night air hit me, but it didn't matter. My life had already been shattered. The woman I loved, the one I had trusted, had handed me over to a world of danger and deceit. And there was no going back. We walked to the car, the engine roaring to life beneath us. I looked back one last time at the house, at the place that had once been my home. It wasn't my home anymore. Catherine had burned it all to the ground. The engine hummed beneath me, a constant thrum in my ears, but it barely registered. My mind was elsewhere, spinning with disbelief and rage. Catherine had thrown my entire life into a blender and hit the high speed. I was supposed to be angry, more than angry. But something inside me felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. The absurdity of it all was too much to comprehend. I'd spent years building this life, building us, only for her to throw it all away. Rick kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his face set, but I could tell he was waiting for me to say something. He'd never seen me like this before, silent, brooding, empty. Maybe it scared him. I finally broke the silence. "What now?" I asked, my voice far colder than I intended. Rick hesitated. "We'll get you to a safe house, lay low for a bit. We need to figure out who else is involved in this." I couldn't even process that. I didn't care who else was involved. The only thing I cared about was the betrayal. The blatant betrayal. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the shock of finding the texts, her smirk, the utter coldness in her eyes when I confronted her. How she thought she could get away with it. How she really believed she could lie her way out of anything, even this. Catherine had always thought she was above everything, above me, above the truth, above consequences. Her arrogance had blinded her to the reality that she was playing with fire. And now that fire was burning everything in its path. The streets blurred by as I stared out the window, trying to make sense of it all. But the only thing that kept repeating in my head was that damn phrase, "I didn't mean for this to happen." She hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She never meant it, but it had happened anyway. And now, here I was, in the middle of some bizarre nightmare. My hands gripped the edge of my seat, knuckles white. The car turned sharply into a side street, and I was jolted back to the present. Rick glanced at me again. "We're here." I didn't respond. My mind was elsewhere. This safe house, the one we had set up just in case something like this happened, felt like a foreign place. I'd never imagined I'd need to run to it, to hide from my own life. Rick opened the door for me, and I stepped out, my legs stiff, like I hadn't moved in hours. We were at the back of an unassuming building, tucked away from the main roads. A place that was supposed to keep me safe. But how could I be safe when my own wife had turned my world upside down? I followed Rick up the stairs to a small apartment with minimal furnishings, nothing fancy, nothing comforting. It was a cage, a temporary escape. I slumped into a chair near the window, staring out into the night. The city lights flickered below like a million little promises, all of them unfulfilled. What happens now? Rick asked again, his voice careful. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to say, I'll be fine, to brush it off and move on. But another part of me, one that I barely recognized, felt like I was unraveling at the seams. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved, had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. And now I was here, alone, vulnerable, with nothing to show for it but a life left in pieces. I wanted to scream. To break something. But I just couldn't. Do you think she's really trying to kill me? I asked Rick, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused before answering, his expression darkening. We don't know yet. But it's a possibility. Jason's got connections. He's dangerous. Jason. That name burned in my mind. I never trusted him, but I had never imagined he'd take it this far. He'd been the charming coworker, the one who laughed at all of Catherine's jokes, who always made her smile in ways I couldn't. He'd wormed his way into her life, and now, into mine. I could almost hear his voice in my head, she's mine now. You were never enough. I turned away from Rick, rubbing my eyes. I thought I was doing everything right, you know? I thought I was being a good husband, working hard, being there when it mattered. Rick was quiet for a moment, before speaking softly, almost like he was afraid of what I might say next. You were. But that's not what she wanted. I nodded. I knew that. I knew that. Catherine hadn't wanted a husband who worked hard. She'd wanted someone who could fill her empty spaces, someone who could be her every whim. But I had been too focused on providing, on making sure she had everything she could ever want, to notice the cracks forming in our marriage. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what I was willing to tolerate. And the truth was, I had tolerated too much. Rick cleared his throat. We need to figure out how to deal with this. I can't just sit here and wait for the next move. I stood up abruptly, pacing the small apartment. What if she comes here? What if she... But I didn't finish the thought. Because suddenly, in the middle of my spiraling thoughts, it hit me. I had let her control me for so long. Let her lies take root, make me question everything. And now, in this moment, I was done. I'm going after her, I said, my voice sharp. I'm going to confront her. I'm going to make her pay for everything she's done. Rick didn't say anything for a moment. I could see the hesitation on his face, but he finally nodded. All right. But we have to be smart. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The decision had already been made. I was done being the victim. It was time for Catherine to face the consequences of her actions. And I was the one who was going to make her regret every damn second. I grabbed my jacket, ready to face whatever came next. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. The anger inside me was a fire that could not be extinguished. Catherine's betrayal had burned away every shred of trust one had left, and now, all that remained was cold, unrelenting fury. Rick's warnings, his advice to stay smart, barely registered in my mind as I pulled open the door, stepping out into the cold night air. Where do you think you're going? Rick's voice was sharp, trying to reel me back in. To finish this. His gaze darkened, and for a brief moment, I saw genuine concern. Logan, you're not thinking straight. I wasn't thinking at all, and that was the problem. My mind was consumed by one thought: confronting Catherine, forcing her to face the choices she'd made, and finally putting an end to this twisted game. I didn't say another word. The door slammed shut behind me, and I walked down the darkened street, each step faster than the last. The chill in the air didn't faze me, the only thing that mattered was getting answers. Answers I didn't even know if I wanted, but answers I knew I was owed. As I approached the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Without thinking, I pulled it out and saw a message from Catherine. I hesitated for a moment, before opening it. Please don't do anything rash. I'm sorry, Logan. I never meant to hurt you. Come home. We can fix this. Please. I stopped walking, staring at the screen, the words swimming in front of my eyes. She was sorry. She wanted to fix it. My hands trembled with rage, the text message burning my skin. I hit reply before I could stop myself. It's too late. Don't bother. I couldn't explain why I felt the need to send that, but there was no going back now. Catherine had pushed me too far. She had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with a few well-chosen words or apologies. The car doors slammed open as I approached. Rick shot me a look of disbelief as I climbed inside. He clearly didn't agree with my decision, but at this point, I didn't care. You sure about this? He asked quietly, his voice low. I nodded, my jaw set. I'm sure. We drove in silence, the only sound the hum of the engine as we sped through the streets. I had no idea where Catherine was, but I had a gut feeling. The penthouse, where we had once celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, everything. She was probably there now, hidden away in the arms of Jason, the man who had taken everything from me. My knuckles gripped the armrest so hard my fingers were white. I stared out the window, my mind spinning. Each second felt like an eternity, each moment pushing me further into the depths of my fury. Rick pulled up outside the building, parking a few yards away from the entrance. I could feel the weight of the moment settling on me like a thick fog. This was it. The moment where I would confront the woman I thought I knew. We go in together, Rick said, as if it were a suggestion. But we both knew it wasn't. I didn't respond, but I followed him toward the building. The lobby was quiet, empty save for the night attendant who gave us a cursory glance before returning to his newspaper. We took the elevator, the quiet ding of each floor a cruel reminder of how close I was to the inevitable confrontation. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as the elevator doors slid open on the top floor. This was it. Rick didn't even have to knock, the door was slightly ajar. We pushed it open, and my eyes immediately fell on Catherine. She was sitting on the couch, her back to us, her silhouette casting a soft shadow in the dim light. Her head turned slowly as we entered, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. But it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was colder, sharper, hollow. She stood up, her expression shifting as she saw the look on my face. The calm, collected woman I thought I knew was gone. All that was left was a woman who had gambled everything, and lost. What do you want, Logan? She asked, her voice laced with a hint of defiance. I want you to explain yourself, I said, my voice low, cutting through the air. I want you to explain how you thought you could destroy everything we built. How you could look me in the eyes, night after night, and lie to me. How you thought I wouldn't find out. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, she crossed her arms and met my gaze head-on. You always were a control freak, weren't you? Always so caught up in your own world that you didn't see what was happening in mine. That was the moment it hit me. She wasn't even sorry. She didn't care. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was justifying her actions. Jason appeared from the hallway, a smug grin on his face. He walked up to Catherine, wrapping his arm around her waist like a trophy. "This is it, huh?" Jason said, eyeing me with a twisted amusement. "I thought you were smarter than this, Logan." My blood ran cold, but the anger, oh, the anger was like a fire in my chest. I took a step forward. "You think you've won, Jason? You think you've beaten me?" He chuckled, the sound grating against my nerves. "You never stood a chance. She was always going to pick me over you. I was everything you weren't. I didn't think. I just reacted." Without warning, I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, clutching his face in shock. "Logan, stop!" Catherine screamed, rushing forward. But it was too late. Something inside me had broken completely. I stood over Jason, my chest heaving, my fists clenched. I looked up at Catherine. "You think I'm a fool? You think I'll let you walk away from this?" She recoiled, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and contempt. "You're pathetic. You always have been." That was it. That was the final straw. In that moment, I realized I was no longer fighting for her, for the marriage, for anything anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my own dignity. I turned to Rick. "We're done here." He didn't hesitate. And as we left the penthouse, leaving Catherine and Jason behind, I realized something: I didn't need to chase after her anymore. I didn't need to fix it. She was the one who needed to fix herself, if she ever could. I was free. The night air felt different as I stepped back out into the cold, sharper than I remembered. Every breath I took cut through my lungs like ice, but there was something cleansing about it. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, this suffocating burden of lies and betrayal, had finally been lifted, if only for a moment. I walked briskly down the hallway, my pace quickening as adrenaline surged through me. Every step felt like an anchor to the man I used to be, the man I was going to become again. I could feel the tension in my muscles, a coiled energy that hadn't been there in years. Rick stayed a few steps behind, but I could hear the faintest sound of his footsteps, his presence a steady reminder that, for all the chaos, there were people who still had my back. We reached the elevator, and I pressed the button with more force than necessary. When the doors opened, the quiet hum of the elevator seemed to mock the storm that was brewing inside me. "What now?" Rick asked quietly as we stepped inside, his voice cautious. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what came next. The last few hours had shattered everything I thought I knew, but there was one thing that was becoming clear as I let the silence wrap around me: I wasn't going to let Catherine get away with this. She wanted to control everything. Well, it was my turn now. "I don't know yet," I replied, my voice hard. "But I'm not letting her walk away from this." Rick didn't respond, and I didn't expect him to. He knew what I meant. Catherine had shattered something inside me, something I'd spent years building. Trust, respect, love, they were all gone, reduced to dust in the wind. There was no going back. But that didn't mean I was going to lie down and let her destroy me. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and we stepped out into the quiet lobby. As we passed the night attendant, who was still buried in his paper, I couldn't help but think of how different everything felt. What had once been my life now felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to a stranger. I looked down at my phone. The screen glowed in the dark, showing a new message from Catherine. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. "Logan, please don't do anything reckless. I'm begging you. Come back and we'll talk." I didn't even read the rest of it. I deleted the message, swiping it off the screen with a quick, furious motion. There was no more talking. No more lies. It was over, and I wasn't going to waste my time on someone who thought I could be manipulated with empty words. Rick watched me, waiting for some kind of response. But I didn't give him one. Instead, I shoved my phone back into my pocket and walked out into the parking lot. The air was still cold, biting at my face like it had a point to make. But it felt good. Felt like the first breath I'd taken in a long time. Rick followed me to the car. I didn't say a word as I climbed into the driver's seat. He didn't question me, didn't ask where I was going. He just slid into the passenger seat, his hands resting on his lap. I started the car, the engine purring to life. The night outside was dark, empty, but for some reason, it felt more honest than anything I'd felt in years. I didn't have a plan. I didn't need one. I just needed to get away, to clear my head, to think. As I drove, my mind wandered back to Catherine. Her face, her words, the way she had acted like nothing was wrong, like I was the one in the wrong for expecting loyalty, for trusting her. For giving her everything and asking for nothing in return. I remembered the coldness in her eyes, the lack of remorse. It hit me then, the person I had loved was gone. And in her place was a shell of a woman, someone who had no problem tearing apart everything I'd built, all for her own selfish desires. That thought made something snap inside me. The rage, the hurt, it all boiled over in a flood of fury. I should have never trusted her, I muttered under my breath. The words felt strange coming from my lips, but they were true. They had to be true. Rick didn't say anything, but I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't need him to say it aloud, I knew what he was thinking. Finally, I pulled off the highway, stopping in front of a small, dimly lit diner. The neon sign flickered above us, casting a soft glow over the parking lot. For a moment, everything was still, just the two of us sitting in the car, neither of us moving. "I need to think," I said, my voice low and tired. Rick didn't argue. We both knew what was at stake now. There was no going back. I pushed open the door, the bell above it ringing softly as I walked in. The diner was nearly empty, just a few old-timers nursing coffee in the corner. The smell of grease and stale air lingered in the background, but I didn't mind. The dull hum of the jukebox was the only sound that filled the air, and it felt like I was living in a moment outside of time. I took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee. The waitress didn't ask any questions, just poured it in front of me and moved on. I stared into the dark, murky liquid, letting my thoughts whirl around me. This wasn't the life I had planned. This wasn't the future I had imagined. But somehow, I knew I couldn't change any of it. What mattered now wasn't what had been taken from me. What mattered was what I was going to do with the wreckage that was left. How I would rebuild from the ruins she had left behind. And I would rebuild. Because, as I sat there, the weight of everything sinking into me, I realized something: she didn't break me. I wasn't the same man I was when I walked into that penthouse. I was something else. Someone else. And I was done hiding behind the lies I'd been fed. Whatever came next, whatever twisted turn this nightmare would take, I was going to face it head-on. I was going to win this war. The coffee was cold now, sitting in front of me as the minutes stretched on. I stared into the blackness of the cup, but it did nothing to calm my thoughts. I didn't feel anything. Not anger. Not sadness. Just an overwhelming, suffocating emptiness. The silence in the diner seemed to magnify everything. It was like I was alone, trapped in my own head with only my thoughts for company. Rick sat next to me, his face unreadable. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like a storm waiting to break. He didn't speak, didn't prod me for more answers. For a man who always had something to say, it was strange how quiet he'd gotten. Maybe he knew better than to ask me anything now. I didn't care about the clock on the wall ticking away seconds, each one taking me further from the moment I had left behind in that penthouse. A part of me wanted to scream, to break something, to make the world outside that diner feel the pain I was carrying. But all that came out was a hollow sigh. It was like the life had been sucked out of me. Finally, I stood up, dropping a few bills on the counter. Rick looked up at me as I moved toward the door, but he didn't try to stop me. He knew what I needed now: space. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how to fix the chaos inside my mind. But I couldn't sit still anymore. My hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with something colder. Something I couldn't even name. I walked through the door into the cold night. The wind slapped me in the face like a harsh reminder that life didn't care about my plans or my pain. It didn't care that I had been betrayed by the woman I thought I would spend forever with. I didn't have a direction. I just needed to move. The streets outside the diner were empty. The occasional car passed by, headlights briefly casting light on the cracked pavement. It felt like the whole world was asleep, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I walked for what felt like hours, lost in thought, lost in the darkness. Rick stayed by my side, never saying a word, just following, waiting for me to make my next move. He wasn't trying to push me in any direction. He was just there, like he always had been. A constant in the chaos, a man who had been through too much with me to judge. Finally, I came to a stop in front of an old, run-down building. The kind of place that had long since stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. It had seen better days, but in some way, that made it feel right. It mirrored the wreckage inside me. I didn't even know why I'd stopped here, but there was something in the air, something in the way the streetlights flickered, that made me feel like I needed to. Like this place was a chapter of my life that I had unfinished business with. "Let's go in," I said, my voice hoarse and raw from the weight of everything that had happened. It was a simple statement, but it felt like an invitation to face whatever was left of my past. Rick didn't question it. We walked through the door, and the dim lights inside greeted us like old friends. The smell of stale beer and tobacco hung in the air, a thick reminder of all the things I had tried to forget. But for some reason, I felt at home in the mess of it all. The chaos outside reflected the chaos inside. The bartender gave us a quick glance, then turned back to his phone without a word. The place was quiet, save for the soft murmur of the few patrons scattered around. I ordered a drink, something strong, and leaned back in my chair, taking it all in. I didn't know why I was here. I didn't know what I expected to find. But there was something about being in a place like this, away from everything, that made me feel like I could breathe again. It was raw, unapologetic, just like the anger that had been boiling inside me. Rick sat across from me, eyes sharp, but he didn't push me for anything. He knew this wasn't about him. This was about me finding some kind of closure, some kind of reckoning with the mess Catherine had left behind. The silence stretched between us, neither of us speaking, just watching the world unfold around us. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about Catherine. I wasn't thinking about Jason. I wasn't even thinking about the mess of my own life. I was just existing. I raised my glass and took a long sip, letting the alcohol burn its way down my throat, clearing the fog from my mind. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world slowed down. The anger didn't consume me. The pain didn't swallow me whole. I wasn't numb, but I wasn't overwhelmed either. I was just present. A voice interrupted the stillness. "You okay, man?" I turned to see the bartender watching me, his brow furrowed. He must have noticed the dark cloud hovering around me. I gave him a quick nod, forcing a half smile. "Yeah. Just thinking." He gave a half smirk, then went back to cleaning glasses behind the bar. I didn't know if he truly cared or if he just wanted to avoid getting involved in whatever drama was unfolding at the table. Either way, it didn't matter. For the first time in days, I let myself feel something other than rage. There was no rush to do anything. No need to figure out what came next. The decisions could wait. Rick broke the silence again, his voice low. "You think you'll go back to her?" I looked at him, the weight of his question hanging in the air. I thought about it, but the answer was already clear. There was no going back. The woman I thought I loved was gone. She had made her choices, and so had I. No, I finally said, my voice steady. I'm done with her. And in that moment, it felt like the truth was cutting through everything. There was no more pretending. No more lies. Just me, standing on my own. No more holding on to something that was already broken. As I looked around the room, I realized something else. The world didn't stop just because I was hurt. It kept turning, and I had to decide whether I was going to let it pass me by or take it all back. I wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet, but one thing was certain, I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Catherine had chosen her path, and now, I was going to choose mine. And that? That was the first step toward reclaiming what was mine. I sat there for a while, the weight of my thoughts grounding me in the worn-out seat. The people around me were strangers, their lives moving forward, full of noise and meaningless chatter. But it felt so quiet inside my head. I didn't need to talk about it anymore. There were no more words left for Catherine, no more pleading or false hope. All that was left was what I'd do next. Rick didn't push me for answers. He wasn't about to tell me what to do, like everyone else who had tried to save me from myself. He was just here, and that was enough. My mind had been spinning for days, consumed by the idea of what had happened and what I had to do to make it right. But now, sitting in this dive bar with a glass of bourbon in front of me, I knew what needed to happen. Rick, I said, voice steady, but with a raw edge, I've been a fool. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, letting me speak my truth. I thought I was doing the right thing, I continued, but in the end, all I did was bury myself in someone else's lies. I put so much of myself into her, into that damn marriage, that I lost who I was. He nodded, his face unreadable. Yeah, man. You did. But you're not lost. I laughed bitterly. It feels like it. Feels don't mean anything in the long run. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. What matters is what you do now. I took another sip from my glass. The burn was familiar now, steadying me. I'm not going back to her. I can't, I said, the words feeling like a release, like air filling my lungs again after I'd been drowning. Rick watched me, his eyes unwavering. He didn't have to say it. He knew I was finally getting it. He knew I was done playing the victim. Catherine's betrayal had shattered me, yes, but it had also cracked open something inside of me. A strength I'd forgotten was there. I stood up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I'm going to take back what's mine. I don't know how yet, but I will. She doesn't get to decide the end of my story. I do. Rick stood with me, his face breaking into a smile for the first time all night. Damn right, you do. We stepped out of the diner, the cold night air biting at my skin, and for the first time in days, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like freedom. It felt like a fresh start. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wouldn't face it alone. I had myself. And I had the people who still cared. The city was alive around us, headlights flashing, people bustling in and out of bars and clubs, all unaware of the war that had just been fought in the shadows. But none of that mattered now. I wasn't a part of their noise anymore. I was focused on something else. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to destroy Catherine, though part of me knew I could if I wanted to. What I needed was my life back. What I needed was to rebuild, to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for something else. I wasn't sure where the road would take me. But I was done walking it alone. For the first time in a long time, I had hope. Not because the situation was better, but because I finally saw that I was in control again. I could change. I could move forward. That was the real victory. Not leaving Catherine behind, but finding the strength to keep moving, no matter what. As we walked away from the diner, the night didn't seem so dark anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The past was behind me. And the future? Well, it was mine to write.